Welcome back to another PT Pearl from the Optimal Body Podcast. I'm Doc Jen.
And I'm Dr. Dom.
And today we're talking into balance, and not just anything about balance, not just showing you what you can do about it, which we're also going to show you, but also, did you know that there's 3 systems to it? So we're going to break it all down for you, hopefully in the easiest way that you can actually understand and start implementing it into your daily life today.
First off, why do you think balance is something important or something we should pay attention to?
I mean, if we just look into any of the studies, we know that as we age, one of the highest, risk of death is fall-related injuries.
Yeah.
And it just gets higher after we pass the age 50. And honestly, 50 is not old.
No.
It's not old. And so if we're already starting to lose some of our senses and our sensation and our balance is starting to go, we have to understand why. And I think what's most important and what we're going to talk into today is the fact that we think of balance as one thing.
Yeah.
Being able to balance on a single leg.
Being able
right?
to stay upright or balance on a single leg.
Exactly.
Totally. Or be on a balance beam.
Well, not many people think about that, luckily.
I guess that whole concept of just like being on a scale or something unstable, and keeping upright, but it's so much more than just that one thing,
exactly.
Stay balanced. I always tongue-in-cheek will tell people, if there are 2 things you can do for the rest of your life, it's be able to stand up without using your hands from a really low surface and balance on one leg for a minute on each side. And for me, that is just reflective of a lot of research that says, okay, if you can't do certain things, you may be at an increased risk of falls.
And so again, people might feel a disconnect, this is so not me, this is not what I need. But we also have to realize that being able to test these systems do play a role in how we integrate throughout our body. And even if you use some of these tools and techniques that we're going to talk about, and understanding where the tests then come into play, and if we improve upon some of those things, we actually improve mobility. We improve our relationship to pain. We improve our strength. We improve our awareness, our activation, no longer our glutes sleep, just by integrating some of these systems all together.
So I think when we are in the clinic and looking at how we test balance, we usually try to say, okay, there's 3 systems of balance. How do we kind of test out which one we might be having the most issues with? Because that can tell us more about a person or more about where the root cause of the issue may be coming from. But then also the test becomes the exercise, and then how do we then train that 1 or 2 systems that we might have a little more difficulty with? Or which one might we be relying on the most so that we should train the other 2, right?
So the most powerful that we as humans typically are using, because we're very fortunate to have, is vision. Yeah. I would say that is the one that we rely on the most for balance. Think about it. If something feels unstable, what is the first thing that usually happens? Your eyes alert. Yeah. Oh my gosh, what's happening underneath me, right? Your eyes are the first thing to kind of jut open. Number
2, and I'll try to explain this as easily as I can, is our vestibular system. What is this crazy vestibular system? I don't know if anyone out there knows what a gyroscope is. And if you don't know what a gyroscope is, it's kind of looks like these systems of canals. And basically, as we turn our head, there are these canals in our head that fluid flows in and out of. And so it basically tells us, okay, I dump my head forward, the fluids flows through the canals and gives us a message saying, okay, we're dumping our head forward. So even if I were to have my eyes closed and I kind of turn my head to the side, I can still tell which way is up.
And you can look up specifically on Google for vestibular physical therapists, because there are physical therapists who will specifically work within their clinic to have more tools to be able to address. And because they work with it specifically, it's not like calling up a PT friend and hoping that she'll do the right thing. They specifically work with clients like this. So it's we don't have to live with this debilitating feeling of I can't ever put my head upside down, or I can't do a flip. A lot of people, they'll go play and just that tumbling motion is gonna knock them out, or trying to do a handstand, and there's different ways that we can start to progress those.
And so especially if you've had something like that, and it seems like I can never even go to a grocery store because as soon as I start turning my head, I get triggered by that. Even though it's not the same, I start to feel some nausea or dizziness or instability, right? So there's all sorts of these vestibular symptoms that we could start experiencing. And that's where a physical therapist starts teaching us exercises on how to like accommodate to that stuff.
Yeah.
And how to get better at that stuff to desensitize and maybe not have those symptoms. So very important. And that's just system number 2.
Yeah.
Moving
We haven't
into,
even got
right, system number 3, which I love as a PT, and I think all PTs kind of like messing with our proprioceptive system, which is basically the system of receptors that, my way of explaining it is, if you close your eyes, you still know where your hands are. You still know where your feet and ankle are. You can still feel the ground beneath your feet and kind of what that's doing, if it's squishy, if it's hard. This kind of packages into our proprioceptive system. That kind of just, without looking at it, tells us what the world is doing around us, or tells us where our joints and tissues are in space. And usually it has to do with teasing out these 3 systems, which one are we having the most issues with? But then also, like, balance isn't a static thing.
Right.
We're not just standing shoulder width apart with our feet shoulder width apart at all times. Like, we move through a dynamic world, which is where our balance tests at the most basic come down to something called like a Romberg, where we just start with feet shoulder width apart, move to feet together, move into tandem stance or a partial tandem stance, which is standing with your feet heel to toe, and then standing on a single leg. And then almost repeating that with your eyes closed, because then you kind of mess with the vision and see if that's a component. Then we move into other ones that are the Berg or single leg stance alone. And there are markers in those tests that say, okay, if you score below this level, you may be at an increased risk of falls. A lot of those are testing more static though. The Berg moves into a little dynamic stuff, but you're still just standing in one position. And so one that we like to start with, because it's one that people notice a lot, is our vision. So if you're just standing with your feet shoulder width apart and trying to stand tall, close your eyes and see if that makes a difference. And a lot of people, within the first 5 to 10 seconds, they might feel this little wobble in your ankles, right? And we'll talk about the ankles and why those wobble so much in a second, but that's the first way to kind of initially say, how much do I rely on my vision? And if it's tough to just stand there shoulder width apart, feet shoulder width apart, and close your eyes, then we might need to learn how to train the other systems for when our vision is challenged. Because like you said, with the eyes closed, if that's easy, standing shoulder width apart, then we kind of progress and we'll narrow up that base of support, stand in a tandem stance, stand on a single leg. And if you can stand on a single leg with your eyes closed, that's pretty good balance. You'll probably start to notice our ankles working a lot, our hips working a lot. And that kind of brings me to another thing that would deal more with the proprioceptive system.
Yes.
So we'll talk about that now. How do we challenge the proprioceptive system? Usually PTs will do that by changing the surface underneath the feet, right? Like a foam pad.
We use this so much when we're recovering from injury, right? Because that is what's going to challenge the muscles, specifically around the ankle. So think of a lot of exercises that physical therapists will use. There'll be like one of the boards that kind of rotates and you use your foot in all these different directions. You stand on a foam pad, you stand on a BOSU. And when we change that base of support, we're making the muscles around that ankle or around that hip and that full leg, your core, even like your breath, everything starts to work and start to be challenged because we're making those muscles work in a different way. Training those proprioceptors on pads and stuff really helps us coordinate that stability in those joints again. Exactly. And the strategies that we use to prevent from falling, especially when we're talking about muscles, we use an ankle strategy. So how exactly what we're talking about, you'll notice, especially if you stand on a single leg, what are those ankles doing to kind of help and stabilizing you? And we also use a hip strategy, and we want to know the difference. Which one are you relying on? Are you relying more on like an ankle strategy to kind of help and stop you? Are you relying on your hips? Or are you relying on your knees? With saying that, we tend to see people use more of a hip strategy when they're more unstable, right? So you're using that ankle strategy first, and then you're using that hip strategy. So if you're doing a balance exercise and you're really using your hips to stay upright, maybe we're not showing enough control to do that activity yet, and we digress or go back a progression to find something that we have a little more ankle strategy and feel a little more stable at the hips. The system, just stand shoulder width apart on something squishy, like a foam pad or a pillow or a cushion, and then maybe try to change that base of support just like we did with our eyes closed and see where you may be at with that. So the third one, if you're just trying to challenge your vestibular system, you're going to want to focus your vision on something so that you're using your vision to tell you where things are at, stand shoulder width apart, and just kind of
shake your head side to side. Nice and slow to start. And again, if that really throws you off, then there might be something going on with our vestibular system, or we might really rely on it. Or if you go with your head up and down, the next thing again would be to challenge and go in more narrow base to a tandem stance and see if that nodding or shaking of the head started to challenge you a little bit. And then that would be more so starting to challenge that vestibular system.
And then we go into integration. So how do we integrate all of those?
Yeah, and I think that when we talk about integrating, that's the most important thing. When we get to the most complex balance tests that we use clinically, it also is trying to best integrate all the information, the physical test, this subjective, or what they're telling, like, oh, I've fallen this many times in this however long, or all of the things, vision, vestibular, strength, how we dynamically do that when we dual task, right? So as we're exercising, if we start to realize, hey, I rely a lot on vision, what's it like to do walking lunges with your eyes closed? What's it like to start to do a standing single leg dumbbell curl instead of standing on two legs, right? It doesn't have to be tough, but when we start to integrate these things a little more, then it starts to prepare us for this variable world that we live in.
So one of the things that I like that we did in integrated kinetic neurology, which is we're going to have those guys on too to kind of explain, because they're really cool at integrating all these systems. But if you just make a little triangle, hold your hands out in front of you, and then bring it to your face, and what eyeball do you notice that you bring your hands to? Normally, we don't just bring it right in the middle of the nose. If you bring it to your dominant eye. And that is the eye that we realize that is actually more dominant in our vision system. So if I just close this dominant eye and then do work with my non-dominant eye, I'm now flooding my system to make it work even harder. Even if I'm doing squats, even if I'm doing lunges, even if I'm doing whatever. Mobility, you can use it with mobility and start challenging the system to integrate more in order to start to really get this all to process and improve.
And I think that that's an important message to kind of end on, that it is never one thing, and it's never going to be one of these systems of balance or how it integrates into our life in a specific way. So even when you go to a clinician, that's why they really tease things out. If you're having a lot of issues with balance, of course, reach out, maybe find somebody, a physical therapist, a neurologic physical therapist, something like that. Otherwise, take a look into some more of those tests or something and see how we start to manipulate the variables a little more. But if not, like Jen said, just try adding something into your workout and you'll be amazed at how many things you can start to change or realize in your body. So there we have it, a little bit on balance and how you might be able to tease out where you're relying on in your body for balance, or systems that you might need to challenge a little more and add into the current exercises you're doing. So if you loved anything, comment below, subscribe, and also comment on things you want to learn and want us to go over, because we always look there first for future PT Pearl topics. So stay tuned.